Clara Elmore drove the shovel into the sun-cracked earth one last time and did not cry. She had promised Thomas she wouldn't. Around her, the hill country burned gold and silent under a July sky that had no mercy. Behind her, two shadows sat on horseback at the ridgemen she didn't know by name but knew by purpose. They were watching her bury her husband, and they were smiling. If you're new here, subscribe, leave a comment with your city, and let's see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The morning Thomas Elmore died, the ranch was quieter than Clara had ever known it. Not the good kind of quiet, the kind that comes after a storm has already passed through and taken something with it. The kind that settles in the walls of a house and refuses to leave. She found him at the bottom of the North Ridge at 6:30, face down in the dry creek bed, one boot missing his surveying rod snapped clean in two beside him. The official story delivered 2 hours later by Deputy Harlan Croft with his hat in his hands and his eyes pointed at the floor was simple enough. "Looks like a fall, Mrs. Elmore. Man walks that ridge in the dark, loses his footing, it happens." Clara had looked at Harlan Croft for a long moment. Then she had looked at Thomas. Then she had looked back at Croft. "Thomas didn't walk that ridge in the dark," she said. "He knew every stone on this property. He could walk it blindfolded." Croft had cleared his throat. "Yes, ma'am. Still, the ground's uneven up there. Sun dries it out something terrible this time of year. His boot is missing. Ma'am, his left boot." Clara kept her voice flat, controlled the way Thomas always told her to when she was angry enough to shake. "A man doesn't lose one boot in a fall. He loses both or neither." Croft had glanced toward the door, then just once, just a flicker, and Clara filed that glance away like a document, like evidence. "I'll note it in the report," he said. He didn't. She buried Thomas herself with the help of their ranch hand, old Pete Dawson, who was 71 years old, and cried the entire time without embarrassment or apology. Clara appreciated that about Pete. He had loved Thomas honestly, openly, the way old men who've worked good land beside good men allow themselves to. She did not cry, not because she didn't want to, not because she wasn't breaking apart somewhere below the sternum where no one could see it, but because the two men on the ridge were watching, and she would be damned before she gave them that. "You see those riders?" she said quietly to Pete as they packed the last of the earth down. Pete didn't look up. "Been there since yesterday evening. You know them. One of 'em's name is Rudd, works for Silas Vance." Pete paused. "Other one, I don't know. Young, carries himself mean." Clara straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. She turned and looked directly at the ridge, not a glance, not a flicker. A long, deliberate, unbroken stare. The two men didn't move. Neither did she. "All right," she said finally. "Go get supper started, Pete. I have letters to write." Silas Vance came himself 3 days later. He rode in on a bay quarter horse worth more than most men in Kerr County would earn in 2 years, flanked by two men she didn't recognize. And one she did, Rudd, the one from the ridge. Vance himself was not what you might expect from a man who owned half the grazing land between the Guadalupe and the Llano. He was not large. He was not loud. He had a lawyer's hands soft and pale, and he spoke the way a man speaks when he has never once in his life been told no, and genuinely cannot imagine the experience. He stepped down from his horse without being invited, removed his hat, and smiled at Clara in the doorway of her porch. "Mrs. Elmore," he said, "I want to start by offering my sincere condolences." "Do you?" said Clara. "Thomas was a good man. We had our disagreements about certain property matters, as you know, but I respected him." "What do you want, Mr. Vance?" He tilted his head slightly, as if her directness was a mildly interesting puzzle. "May I come in?" No. The smile didn't disappear. It just changed into something slightly different, something that had never been warm to begin with. "All right then, I'll keep it brief." He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. "I'm prepared to offer you $1,400 for the Elmore parcel, the full 312 acres, including the water rights on the East Fork." "That's a fair price, Mrs. Elmore. More than fair given the current market." Clara looked at the paper. She did not take it. "And if I decline, then you'll be managing this ranch alone through a Texas summer without your husband, with cattle to move before October and a fence line on the northwest boundary that needs significant repair." He said it gently, helpfully, as if he were a friend pointing out a problem she hadn't noticed. "I'm trying to make your situation easier." "You're trying to make your situation easier," Clara said. "There's a difference." Vance looked at her for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger exactly, more like recalibration. "I'll leave the offer open," he said. "Take some time to think." "I don't need time." "Take it anyway." He settled his hat back on his head. "Grief makes people stubborn, Mrs. Elmore. It's understandable, but stubbornness doesn't water cattle." He turned and walked back to his horse. Rudd held the reins for him. As Vance mounted, he looked back at her once, and for just a moment, the gentleness was gone entirely. "I'll be in touch," he said. They rode out. Clara stood on the porch until she couldn't hear the hoofbeats anymore. Then she went inside, sat down at Thomas's desk, and opened the bottom drawer where he kept his private correspondence. She had a letter to write, and she knew exactly who to send it to. His name was Elias Thorne. He was Thomas's younger brother by 4 years, which made him 38, which made him 7 years older than Clara, which was the least relevant fact about him. The most relevant facts were these: Elias had spent 6 years with the Pinkerton National Detective Agency out of Chicago. He had left the agency under circumstances that were officially described as resignation by mutual agreement, and unofficially described, depending on who you asked, as either principled insubordination or the best decision he ever made. He had come to Thomas and Clara's wedding 9 years ago, stayed 2 weeks, helped repair the north barn roof without being asked, and left with a handshake and a promise to visit that he had never quite managed to keep. Thomas had never said a word against him for it. Elias carries something heavy. Thomas had told her once late at night with the windows open and the summer dark pressing in soft and warm. "He always has. He needs room to carry it. Don't hold that against him." Clara had not held it against him, but she had made note of it. She wrote to him now without sentiment or ceremony. "Thomas is dead. I believe he was killed. A man named Silas Vance wants this land badly enough to send riders to watch me bury my husband. I need your eyes and your history. Come when you can. Come faster than that." She sealed the letter, rode to Kerrville herself the following morning before Pete was awake, and sent it by telegraph from the post office on Main Street. The telegrapher, a young man named Gerald, who had known Thomas since childhood, read the message before sending it. They all did, and everyone knew it, and his face went careful and controlled in a way that told Clara he wasn't entirely surprised. "Gerald," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Who owns this telegraph office?" Gerald stared at the machine in front of him. "The county, ma'am. Technically." "And who funds the county's communications budget?" A very long pause. "I'll make sure this goes through personally," Gerald said. "First wire out." "Thank you." The harassment began as these things often do with small things. On the 4th day after Vance's visit, she found the northwest fence cut. Not broken, cut clean, deliberate with wire cutters. 3 of her cattle had drifted through into the scrub. It took her and Pete the better part of the day to find them and most of the following morning to repair the fence. On the 7th day, a rider she didn't know stopped at the property line and sat there for 2 hours doing nothing, just sitting, just watching while Clara moved through her morning chores. She went about her work without acknowledging him. When she came back from the water trough the 2nd time, he was gone. On the 9th day, she rode out to check the East Fork water line and found that someone had jammed rocks and debris into the primary channel. The cattle in the lower pasture had been without clean water for at least a day. She spent 4 hours in the July heat clearing it, her hands bleeding by the end. Her temper at a place that would have alarmed Thomas if he'd been there to see it. That evening, sitting on the porch with a rifle across her knees, and Pete on the step below her with his old revolver on his hip, she heard hoofbeats on the main road. Slow, measured, not rushed. She raised the rifle. Pete got to his feet. A single rider came around the cedar break at the road's bend and stopped when he saw her. He was lean trail dusty, with dark eyes that assessed the rifle without alarm, and a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in at least 4 days. He wore no badge. His coat was plain. His hands were visible and empty. He looked at her across the distance for a moment. "You always greet family like that," he said. Clara lowered the rifle approximately 2 inches. Not entirely. Just enough to indicate she was listening. "You're 9 days late," she said. Elias Thorne stepped down from his horse. "I know," he said. "I came the long way." "Why?" He tied his horse to the post without hurrying, came up the porch steps, looked at the rifle, looked at Pete, looked at Clara. "Because I wanted to see who was watching the roads before I got here," he said. "And Mrs. Elmore." He said her name the way Thomas used to, precise and respectful. "Someone is absolutely watching the roads." Clara finally lowered the rifle all the way. "Come inside," she said. "I have something to show you." She showed him the survey document. Thomas had filed it 18 months ago, a meticulous federally registered land survey establishing the exact boundaries of the Elmore parcel, including a notation Clara hadn't fully understood at the time, a reference to an earlier grant document from 1847, which, if Thomas's calculations were correct, invalidated the eastern boundary claim that Vance had been using to assert grazing rights over a significant portion of the adjacent acreage. In plain terms, Vance had been claiming land that wasn't his. And Thomas had known it. And Thomas had documented it. And Thomas had filed a copy with the Federal Land Office in Austin and kept the original here, hidden inside the back cover of a Bible that had belonged to his mother. Elias read it without speaking for a very long time. Clara sat across the desk and watched him read. "He never told you," Elias said finally. "He told me there was a dispute. He didn't tell me the extent of it." She paused. Thomas protected people from things, even when they didn't want protecting. Elias looked up at her. Something in his face shifted recognition, maybe. Or grief, wearing a practical expression. "He ever say anything about what Vance might do if this document came to light?" He said a man like Vance doesn't accept losing quietly. Elias set the document down carefully on the desk. He was quiet for a moment, and in that quiet Clara could hear the night insects starting up outside and the distant lowing of cattle settling in for the dark. "No," Elias said. "He doesn't." He looked at the document again. "This needs to get to the federal court in Fredericksburg, not the county courthouse. Federal. Vance has Croft in his pocket, maybe more than Croft, but federal jurisdiction is harder to buy." "I know. And between now and when we can get there—" "I know that too," Clara said quietly. Elias looked at her for a long moment. "Thomas said you were the toughest person he'd ever known," he said. "I used to think he was being sentimental." Clara stood, picked up the Bible, and set it back in the drawer. Locked it. "He wasn't sentimental," she said. "He was accurate." She looked at Elias steadily. "We leave for Fredericksburg in 3 days. That gives us time to prepare, and gives them time to make a mistake." She paused. "They've been making mistakes since the beginning. Men like Vance always do. They confuse patience with weakness." Elias picked up his hat from the desk. "All right," he said. "You'll take the east room," Clara said. "Pete keeps the rifle by the barn. I'll take the watch tonight. You take tomorrow." "You don't have to." "Elias." Her voice was quiet, but it stopped him cold. "I buried my husband 9 days ago in ground so hard it bent 2 shovel handles. I have not slept more than 3 hours at a stretch since. I have repaired a cut fence, cleared a blocked water line, and aimed a rifle at my brother-in-law on my own front porch." She held his gaze without flinching. "I know what I have to do. I just needed someone I could trust to help me do it." Elias Thorne looked at her, this woman in a dusty work dress with calloused hands, an iron in her spine, and nodded. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Outside, the Texas summer pressed down dark and heavy, and full of things unseen. Somewhere on the ridge, if Clara had to guess, someone was watching the house. Let them watch, she thought. She had 3 days. She had a document. She had Elias. And she had Thomas's voice in the back of her mind, steady as the land itself. "You are stronger than you know, Clara. You always have been." She believed him. She always had. The morning after Elias arrived, Clara was already at Thomas's desk before sunrise. She had spread every document she owned across the surface land: filings, tax receipts, water rights agreements, correspondence with the county assessor going back 6 years. And she was reading each one with the kind of focus that comes not from calm, but from controlled fury. The kind that doesn't shake. The kind that works. Elias found her there when he came downstairs, still pulling on his coat, and stopped in the doorway. "You sleep at all," he said. "Some." She didn't look up. "There's coffee on the stove. When you're ready, I need you to look at this." She tapped a folded paper on the left side of the desk. Tax assessment from 1869. Vance's eastern boundary claim puts his property line 40 yards inside what this assessment records as Elmore land. He's been grazing cattle on our grass for 3 years and paying taxes on acreage he doesn't legally own. Elias poured his coffee, came to the desk, and picked up the assessment. He read it standing up. "He knows this," Elias said. It wasn't a question. "Of course he knows it. Thomas knew it. That's why Thomas filed the federal survey." Clara finally leaned back in the chair. "What I can't figure out is why Vance waited. Thomas filed that survey 18 months ago. Why didn't Vance move sooner?" Elias set down the paper and looked at her. "Because he thought he could buy Thomas out first, quietly. No court, no record, no public dispute." He picked up his coffee. When Thomas refused, he changed his approach, Clara said. "And now Thomas is dead." The words sat between them plain and heavy, the way true things do when there's no softening them. Clara nodded once. "And now Thomas is dead." She stood and gathered the documents into a precise stack. Her hands were steady. Her jaw was set in a way that Elias was already beginning to recognize, not hardness exactly, but resolution. The look of a woman who has already made every decision that needed to be made and is simply executing them now, one at a time. "I need to know everything you know about Silas Vance," she said. "Not what the county knows, what you know." Elias pulled out a chair and sat down. He was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "Vance came to Kerr County in 1866, he said. "Right after the war, when land was cheap and enforcement was thin. He bought his first parcel for almost nothing from a family that couldn't make the taxes. Did it legal enough." He paused. "The second parcel there were questions. Man who sold it claimed afterward he didn't understand what he was signing. Nothing was ever proved. Third parcel. Man disappeared." Elias's voice stayed flat. "Ruled accidental. Different county. Different deputy." Clara was very still. "How do you know all this?" "Because 2 years ago, a land attorney in San Antonio filed a complaint with the Pinkerton office. Said he believed Vance had been systematically acquiring land through intimidation and manufactured legal claims across 4 counties. Asked us to look into it quietly." Elias set down his cup. "I was assigned to the case for 3 months before the client withdrew the complaint." "Why did he withdraw it?" "He said he'd reconsidered." Elias looked at her. "He'd also just had his office broken into and his files stolen. But he said he'd reconsidered." Clara sat down slowly. She looked at the stack of documents in front of her, and something moved across her face, not fear, but the cold recognition of a pattern that had been in motion long before Thomas fell from that ridge. "He's done this before," she said. "Many times. And he's never been touched because he's always operated just below the line of what's provable in a local court. He owns the right people in the right places." Elias leaned forward. "But federal jurisdiction is different. Federal courts don't answer to county commissioners or local sheriffs. If we can get Thomas's survey before a federal judge along with the original 1847 grant document and the tax assessment discrepancy, it won't just prove the land is ours," Clara said slowly. "It'll expose the entire pattern." "Yes." She looked at him. "That's why he can't let us get to Fredericksburg." "No." Elias said. "He cannot." The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was the silence of two people who understand exactly what they're facing and are choosing to face it anyway. Then Pete knocked on the doorframe from the kitchen. "Sorry to interrupt," the old man said, his voice careful. "But there's 4 riders on the South Road, just sitting there. Been there about 20 minutes now." Clara and Elias looked at each other. "4, Elias said. "Yesterday there were 2, said Clara. She walked to the window and looked out without moving the curtain. 4 riders, spread in a loose line across the South Road where it passed the property boundary. Not advancing, not retreating. Just present the way a bruise is present, not doing anything, simply making itself known." "He's escalating," Elias said from behind her. "Yes." Clara let the curtain fall back. "Good." Elias blinked. "Good. Men who escalate make mistakes faster." She turned from the window. "Let them sit there. We have work to do." That afternoon, Elias rode the property line while Clara continued working through the documents. He came back 2 hours later with dust on his coat and a new quality to his silence, the concentrated processing kind. "What did you find?" Clara asked without looking up from the desk. "Fresh tracks on the North Ridge," he said. "Multiple horses. Someone's been up there more than once in the past week." Clara set down her pen. "How recently?" "2 days ago. Maybe less." He paused. "Clara, that's the ridge where Thomas fell." She was quiet for a long moment. "Someone went back," she said. "Someone went back," he confirmed. "Looking for something, or making sure something was gone." She stood abruptly and crossed to the desk drawer, unlocked it, took out the Bible. Opened the back cover. Thomas's original survey document was there folded, as he'd left it tucked between the end paper and the board. She held it for a moment, then she looked at Elias. "We can't keep this here," she said. "No. If they come in the night." "They will come in the night," he said. "Not if, when." His voice was level and certain, the voice of a man who has tracked enough dangerous people to understand exactly how they operate. "Not tonight, not tomorrow. They'll wait until they think we've gotten comfortable, until they think the immediate alertness has faded." He crossed his arms. "We have maybe 4 or 5 days, or so." Clara looked at the document in her hands. Something about the handwriting on it. Thomas's handwriting, careful and precise. The same hand that had written her name in a letter every single time he'd traveled away from the ranch, made her chest tighten in a way she wouldn't acknowledge out loud. "I want a copy made," she said. "Tonight." "I can do that. And I want the original somewhere they won't think to look." She thought for a moment. "Pete's room. They'll search Pete's room. Not inside his left boot, they won't." She met Elias's eyes. Pete's had a hollow left heel since 1861. He used to keep Confederate orders in it during the war. Thomas found out about it by accident 2 years ago and never told a soul. She paused. "He told me." Elias looked at her steadily for a moment. "Of course he did," he said quietly. Something passed across Clara's face, a flicker of something private and painful. And then it was gone. "Make the copy," she said. "I'll talk to Pete." That evening, the 4 riders on the South Road became 3. One peeled off and rode toward Kerrville at a pace that wasn't casual. Elias watched him go from the barn door. "Reporting in," he said when Clara came to stand beside him. "What will he tell Vance? That we haven't panicked, that we haven't packed, that there are 2 of us now instead of 1. He turned from the door. "Vance will want to know who I am." "Does that concern you?" Elias considered. "It should concern him more than it concerns me. But yes, if he identifies me, my history with the Pinkertons, the previous investigation, he'll understand that this isn't a widow he can simply outlast." He paused. "He may move faster than I'd like. Then we move faster too." Clara turned and walked back toward the house. Then she stopped and looked back at him over her shoulder. "Elias, the original investigation, the one in San Antonio. You said the client withdrew the complaint. She held his gaze. But you didn't stop investigating, did you? A long beat of silence. I resigned from the agency 4 months later, Elias said carefully. That's not what I asked. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, no, he said. I didn't stop. She nodded slowly, as if something she'd already suspected had just been confirmed. Then what do you have? She said. He reached into his coat and produced a small leather journal worn, traveled the kind of object that has been handled daily for years. Everything? He said. 3 years of it. Clara crossed back to him and took the journal. She opened the first page, read 3 lines, and closed it again. She looked up at him. Why didn't you come sooner? She said. Not angry. Something more complicated than angry. Elias's jaw tightened. A muscle moved. Because I thought I had more time. I thought Thomas... He stopped, started again. I thought if I built the case fully enough before I came, we could end this cleanly. Permanently. Not just for the Elmore Ranch. For everyone Vance has done this to. Thomas might still be alive, Clara said. The words weren't an accusation. They were simply true, and both of them knew it, and there was nothing either of them could do with that knowledge except carry it. Yes, Elias said. His voice was very quiet. He might. Clara handed the journal back. Then we use what you have, she said. We add Thomas's documents. We get to Fredericksburg, and we make it permanent. She looked at him steadily. That's how we honor him. All right. Elias looked at her for a moment. Then he straightened. All right, he said. The second day passed. The third. On the morning of the third day, a boy came to the property line on a pony, couldn't have been more than 12 years old, with a folded note in his hand, and the wary look of a child who has been paid to do something he instinctively knows is not entirely safe. Clara came to the fence and took the note from him. Who gave you this? She said. Man in town, the boy said. At the saloon. Said to give it to the lady at the Elmore Ranch and nobody else. What did he look like? Old, said the boy. Had a limp. Said his name was Marsh. Clara unfolded the note. It said, I know what happened on the ridge. I was there. I need to talk to you before you go to Fredericksburg. Come alone. Tonight. The old Miller place on the Creek Road. She read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in her pocket. Thank you, she told the boy. She reached in her other pocket and gave him 2 coins. You didn't bring this to the Elmore Ranch. You brought it to the Henderson place 2 miles west. Do you understand? The boy looked at the coins, looked at her. Yes, ma'am, he said. He turned his pony and rode away without looking back. Clara walked back to the house. Elias was at the kitchen table cleaning his revolver when she came in and put the note in front of him. He read it without picking it up. Marsh, he said. You know the name. Doyle Marsh. He worked for Vance 3 years ago. Odd jobs. The kind of odd jobs you don't ask too many questions about. Elias looked up. He was dismissed about 18 months ago. Around the same time Thomas filed the survey. Clara pulled out a chair and sat down. You think Vance cut him loose because he knew too much? I think Vance cut him loose because he was a loose thread. Men like Vance get very tidy when they're preparing to do something permanent. Elias's voice was careful. If Marsh was on that ridge... He's a witness, Clara said. Or a trap. They looked at each other across the table. It could be both, Clara said. It could absolutely be both. Elias picked up the note, read it again. Come alone. That's the part that concerns me. I know. You're not going alone. I know that too. She met his eyes. You'll go ahead. Get to the Miller place before I do. Find a position and hold it. If it's a trap, you'll see it before I walk into it. If it's not... She stopped. If Marsh was on that ridge when Thomas fell Elias, if he saw what happened, then we have a witness to murder, Elias said quietly. Then we have everything, Clara said. The sun was still 2 hours from setting when Elias left through the back of the property on foot, moving quietly through the scrub with the ease of a man who has spent years learning to be invisible. Clara told Pete what was happening, not all of it, but enough. Pete listened, nodded, and checked his revolver without being asked. "I'll keep the lights on in the house," Pete said. "Make it look like we're all still here." "Good." Clara hesitated. "Pete, I ain't going to worry about myself," the old man said. "You just make sure you come back." She rode to the creek road as the sky went orange, keeping her pace unhurried, watching the land around her with the quiet attention she had learned from years of working this country. Nothing felt wrong, but that she had learned meant nothing. The most dangerous moments never felt wrong until they were already upon you. The Miller place was abandoned, had been for 2 years since the Miller family had sold and moved back east. She tied her horse at the fence and walked toward the door, and before she reached it, a voice came from the darkness inside. "Mrs. Elmore." Low, male, tight with something that might have been fear. "Mr. Marsh," she said. She didn't reach for the rifle on her saddle, didn't show her hand, just stood in the doorway and waited. A man stepped into the fading light. Old was right, the boy had read him correctly. He was in his 60s, lean as wire, with a face that had been weathered by outdoor work and something harder than weather. He had the look of a man who hadn't slept properly in a long time. "You came alone," he said, looking past her at her horse. "I came as directed," she said, which was not the same thing, and from the slight shift in his expression, he understood that. "I need you to understand something first," Marsh said. He was wringing his hat in both hands, she noticed. Something about that detail, that habitual helpless gesture, made him real to her in a way that made her more careful, not less. A man who wrings his hat is afraid, and a man who is afraid is unpredictable. "I didn't know what Vance was going to do. I knew there was a dispute about the land. I'd done things for him before that I wasn't proud of, but I thought—" He stopped. "It don't matter what I thought. What matters is what I saw." Clara was very still. "Tell me." Marsh pulled a breath. "Let it out." "I was on that ridge because Vance sent me to find out if Thomas had taken the survey tools up there. He'd heard from somebody in town that Thomas was planning another survey run, and he wanted to know if that was true." Marsh swallowed. "Thomas was there. He was working the ridge, measuring." He stopped again. "Go on," Clara said. Her voice was absolutely level. 2 other men came up behind him. I didn't know them. I'd never seen them before. Vance must have brought them in from somewhere else, somewhere they wouldn't be recognized. Marsh's hands tightened on the hat. It was quick. That's what I keep thinking about. How quick it was. Thomas, didn't have time to— "I understand," Clara said, because she did. Because she needed him to keep talking, and she could feel that if he dwelt in the details, she might lose him to his own guilt or his own fear, and she couldn't afford either. "He went down," Marsh said, "and they went through his tools, his bag, looking for papers. I don't think they found what they were looking for, because one of them said something about the house." Clara's breath caught just for a half second, just a heartbeat. "They said the house," she repeated. "Said whatever he was looking for, it'd be there." Marsh looked at her directly for the first time. "Mrs. Elmore, I am sorry. I know that don't fix a thing, but I am." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "Will you testify to this?" she said. Marsh blinked. A federal court, in Fredericksburg, under oath. Everything you just told me." She stepped forward 1 pace. "I need a witness, Mr. Marsh. Without a witness, what we have is strong, but not enough. With you—" She stopped. "With you, we can end this. Not just for Thomas. For every family Vance has done this to." Marsh looked at his hat. He looked at the floor. He looked at the door behind her like a man calculating the distance between himself and the nearest exit. "He'll know it was me," Marsh said. "Yes. He's got people everywhere in this county. I know. If I testify before we even get to the courthouse, he could—" "Elias," Clara said, raising her voice slightly. A beat of silence. Then Elias stepped through the side door of the abandoned house, having come through the back window 5 minutes before Clara arrived, and stood against the wall with his arms crossed and his expression steady. Marsh spun around. His hand went toward his hip, and then stopped when he registered that Elias hadn't moved, hadn't reached for a weapon, was simply standing there with the calm assessment of a man who has no need to threaten anyone. "Elias Thorne," Elias said. "Thomas Elmore's brother, former Pinkerton." He let that sit for a moment. "I've been building a file on Silas Vance for 3 years, Mr. Marsh. What you just told Mrs. Elmore corroborates everything in it. If you come with us to Fredericksburg, I can guarantee federal protection from the moment we file until the moment the court renders judgment." He paused. "I can also tell you that the men who don't cooperate with a federal investigation into conspiracy and homicide tend to face a different kind of legal exposure. The kind that comes from being associated with the man who ordered the murder." Marsh stared at him. The hat was very still in his hands now. "You're saying I'm already in trouble either way," Marsh said. "I'm saying the only trouble you can walk away from is the trouble you face in that courtroom," Elias said. "The other kind doesn't give you a chance to walk away." The silence stretched. Outside, something called in the dark, a night bird or the wind moving through the cedar. Clara didn't move, didn't speak. She had learned something from Thomas, and from hard years, and from 3 days of watching Elias work, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply wait and let a man come to his own correct conclusion. Marsh let out a long, unsteady breath. "When do we leave?" he said. "Tomorrow morning," Clara said. "Before sunrise." Marsh nodded slowly. He looked at Clara with something in his face that wasn't quite respect and wasn't quite shame, but was somewhere in the country between them. "Your husband," he said. "He was a good man. I want you to know that when I say that, I mean it plain." Clara held his gaze. "I know," she said. "That's exactly why we're here." She turned and walked out into the dark, where the stars over the Texas hill country were very bright and very cold, and the land spread away in every direction, her land, Thomas's land, the land that men had already died for and other men would try to take. Not tonight, she thought, and not without a fight they won't soon forget. Behind her, she heard Elias say something quiet to Marsh, and heard Marsh's low response, and heard the particular silence of an agreement being made between men who understand consequences. She untied her horse. 3 days of waiting, 3 days of watching and being watched and holding her nerve and doing the work. Tomorrow it ended, one way or another. She rode back toward the ranch at a steady pace, and she did not look behind her, and she did not let herself feel the grief that was sitting patiently in her chest, waiting for a moment she could afford. That moment wasn't yet, but it was coming, and when it came, she would let it. She would let all of it come, the grief and the relief and the rage and the love, because Thomas deserved to be mourned properly by a woman who had seen justice done. She owed him that. She owed him everything. She didn't sleep. She had told herself she would have lain down on top of the quilt with her boots still on, and her rifle leaned against the nightstand, and told herself that a woman who hasn't slept properly in 2 weeks cannot afford another sleepless night before a hard ride. But sleep didn't come, and after an hour of lying there with Thomas's side of the bed cold and wide beside her, she stopped pretending. She got up, went to the window, and looked out at the dark. Elias was in the east room. Marsh was in the barn, his choice not theirs, and Clara hadn't argued with it. A man who has lived with guilt for weeks develops his own relationship with enclosed spaces, and she understood that. Pete was asleep in the bunkhouse, or pretending to be. The property was quiet in the way that had stopped meaning safe to her sometime around the day she found Thomas in the creek bed. She stood at the window and listened. The thing about growing up on working land is that you learn the sounds of it, the way you learn a person's voice. You learn what's normal and what isn't, what belongs to the night, and what has been introduced into it. Clara had grown up on her father's farm outside Comfort, 12 miles south, and she had been working this ranch for 9 years, and she knew every sound this land made when it was left alone. What she was hearing now was not a sound the land made when it was left alone. It was subtle. A displacement. The kind of thing you feel before you can name it, a change in the quality of the silence, a pressure that doesn't belong. She picked up the rifle. She crossed to the hallway and knocked twice on Elias's door. 2 short, sharp knocks, the signal they had agreed on that afternoon. His door opened in 4 seconds. He was already dressed, already holding his revolver, and the look on his face told her he'd heard it too. "How many?" she said under her breath. He held up 3 fingers. 3. She had counted a disturbance on the south side. He must have already been awake and had the north and west. She adjusted. 3 men at minimum. Coming in quiet, which meant they weren't here to intimidate, they were here to do something specific and get out. The document. That was what they were here for. Not her. Not Elias. The original survey, the Bible, the evidence that Thomas had spent 18 months building and had died to protect. "Pete," she said. "I'll go through the kitchen," Elias said. "I can get to Pete without crossing the main floor. The original is still in Pete's boot." "I know. Go to the study. Lock the door. If anyone gets past me—" "Nobody's getting past me in my own house," Clara said flatly. Elias looked at her for exactly 1 second. Then he let it go. "South window," he said. "Don't shoot Pete. Don't shoot Marsh either. He's in the barn." "Right." Elias moved toward the kitchen. Quiet, economical, the kind of movement that doesn't create sound. Clara went the other direction toward the study and positioned herself behind the desk with a clear line to the door and the south window. She waited. The first sound that didn't belong came from the south window. A careful pressure on the frame, the specific friction of wood being worked from outside. Someone who knew what they were doing. Someone who had done this before. Clara did not move. Did not breathe loudly. Did not do anything except watch the window and keep her finger outside the trigger guard the way her father had taught her when she was 11 years old. You don't put your finger there until you've decided, he'd said. Until you've decided, keep it outside. The decision has to come first. She'd made her decision. The window eased inward. A man came through it. Not large, lean and quick-dressed, dark, and had his feet on the floor and was reaching for the desk before his eyes had fully adjusted to the interior dark. "Don't," said Clara. He froze. She could see the shape of him, the way his body went rigid with the specific quality of a man who has just realized the situation is not what he was told it would be. His right hand was extended toward the desk. His left was at his side. "Left hand up," Clara said. "Slow." He raised it. "Turn around." He turned. Younger than she'd expected, maybe 25, with a face that would have been unremarkable anywhere else. But here was lit with something caught between calculation and fear. He was looking at the rifle, the way people look at things that have abruptly become very real. "There's a woman with a rifle," he said. "Not to her." Into the dark toward the window he'd come through in the tone of a man reporting to someone still outside. "Yes," said Clara. "There is. And the man who trained me to use it could hit a fence post at 200 yards in a crosswind, so I want you to be very thoughtful about what you do next." A beat of silence. Then from outside the window, "Kate, get the papers and get out." A second voice, older, used to giving orders. The young man, Kate, apparently looked at Clara and looked at the desk and made the kind of rapid assessment that men make when they're weighing competing dangers. Clara shifted the rifle fractionally. "The papers aren't here," she said. "If that's what you came for." "You're lying," said the voice from outside. "You're welcome to believe that," Clara said evenly. "And your man here is welcome to move toward this desk, and then I'll know for certain you're willing to get him killed for a document you won't find." Silence. Long enough to breathe twice. "Where is it?" said the outside voice. "Somewhere you won't reach it before a federal court does," Clara said. "Tell Mr. Vance that." Another silence. Longer. Then from somewhere on the north side of the house, A single sharp sound, the unmistakable sound of a struggle, fast and physical ending in a hard impact, and then stillness. Clara's jaw tightened. She kept her eyes on Kate and her rifle exactly where it was. "That's my brother-in-law," she said. "Former Pinkerton. He's been waiting for one of yours to come through the north side for about 3 hours now." She paused. "However many of you there are, you're short one." Kate's breathing changed. She could hear it from across the room. Kate. The outside voice again, and now there was something different in it. Not quite panic, but the early edge of it. "Kate, we need to go," Clara said to the young man. "Tell him to go, and tell Vance—" She stopped. "Actually, don't tell Vance anything. Let him wait and wonder. It'll do him more good." Kate backed toward the window. His eyes never left her. She let him go, not because she couldn't stop him, but because a man running back to Vance with a failure report was more useful to her than a confrontation that served no purpose tonight. He went through the window. She heard 2 sets of footsteps moving away fast, and then hoofbeats, and then the particular quality of quiet that means the immediate threat has passed, and the deeper one remains. She crossed to the window, latched it from the inside, and went to find Elias. He was in the kitchen. He had a man pinned face down on the floor with one knee in his back, and both the man's hands secured behind him with a leather strap from the hook by the door. Pete was standing 3 feet away with his revolver in a hand that was shaking slightly, but pointed steady. The man on the floor was Rudd. Of course it was Rudd. It was always Rudd, patient and inevitable as a bad debt. "Hello?" said Clara, looking down at him. Rudd said nothing. His cheek was pressed against the kitchen floorboards, and his expression was the compressed, furious stillness of a man conserving his energy. "How many were there total?" Clara asked Elias. "4, as best I can tell. 2 got away on the south side, you saw them. 1 came through the study window, 1 stayed outside giving orders." She looked at Rudd again. "And Rudd came through the north." "Through the back door, actually," Elias said. "Someone gave him a key." The word sat in the room. Pete looked up sharply. Clara looked at the back door. Original lock, original key. The spare had been kept on the hook by the barn for emergency use in the same place for 9 years. "How long has that spare key been accessible?" Elias said. "I don't know," Clara said. "Long enough, evidently." She crouched down to Rudd's eye level. "Who told you about the key?" Rudd stared at the floor. "There are 3 ways this goes," Clara said conversationally. "First way, you say nothing, we hold you here until morning. We take you to Fredericksburg with us and let a federal court decide what to do with a man found breaking and entering with criminal intent. Second way, you tell me who told you about the key, which tells me who in my circle has been talking to Vance. And we still take you to Fredericksburg, but you go as a cooperative witness instead of a defendant." She paused. "Third way is the one where I lose my patience, and you don't want that way, Rudd. I've been awake for 19 hours, and I buried my husband 11 days ago, and I am genuinely profoundly done with men who come into my house uninvited." Rudd was quiet for a moment. Then, "The telegrapher," he said. "Gerald. He's been reporting to Vance for 2 years. Clara straightened. She felt something go cold and clean through her the way understanding feels when it finally arrives in complete form. Gerald, who had read her telegraph to Elias, who had assured her he would send it personally, who had, and here the coldness settled deeper, been the person who confirmed to Vance that Clara had contacted a former Pinkerton and was preparing to fight. "That's why Vance moved up his timeline," she said. "Not to Rudd, to Elias." Elias was watching her. Yes, he wasn't escalating because we were getting stronger. He was escalating because Gerald told him exactly how strong we were getting. She felt the shape of it fully now, the way Vance's responses had always been slightly too precisely calibrated, always hitting just after she'd made a significant move. Not intuition, information. "He's known every step we've taken since the first telegram." "Almost every step," Elias said carefully. She understood what he meant. Elias had come the long way watching the roads, not telegraphing ahead. The meeting with Marsh had been initiated by Marsh, not known to Vance in advance. The location of the document had never been communicated through any channel Vance could access. "He knows we have the document," Clara said. "He doesn't know where it is." "And he doesn't know about Marsh," Elias said. "Which means tonight was about getting the document before we could leave." Clara looked at Rudd. "What were your instructions if you found it?" Rudd said nothing. "Destroy it," Elias said quietly. "Or bring it back. Either way, it never reaches Fredericksburg." The gravity of that settled over all of them. Pete sat down heavily on the kitchen bench. Rudd stared at the floor, and Clara stood very still in the middle of her kitchen in the house Thomas had built with his own hands, and let herself feel for exactly 10 seconds the full weight of what was in motion around her. Then she straightened her shoulders. "Pete," she said, "go check on Marsh. Make sure he's still in the barn and that he's all right." "Yes, ma'am." "And Pete, bring me the boot." Pete understood. He went out the back door without a word. Clara looked at Elias. "We leave before sunrise. Not our original time. Earlier." "How much earlier?" 2 hours before first light." She looked at the window. "If Gerald has been reporting to Vance, Vance already knows we plan to leave tomorrow morning. He'll have men on the main road by dawn." "And 2 hours before first light. He won't expect it. He'll expect us to be shaken after tonight. He'll expect delay." She looked at Rudd on the floor. "We're taking him with us. He'll slow us down. He's a witness to criminal conspiracy, Elias. He broke into this house on Silas Vance's orders. That's not nothing in a federal court." She looked at Rudd directly. "And I think when Mr. Rudd has had time to consider his options fully, he'll understand that cooperating is considerably better for his long-term health than the alternative." Rudd was looking at her now with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before. Not defiance, not contempt. Something more complicated, the look of a man who has spent years working for someone powerful and has just in the space of an hour watched that power fail to produce the result it promised. "Vance told us you'd run," Rudd said. Clara looked at him steadily. "He was wrong. He said a woman alone with a ranch and no family wouldn't last 3 weeks without selling. He was wrong about that too. He said—" Rudd stopped himself. Something moved across his face. "He said the Pinkerton brother wouldn't come. Said you'd written the letter out of desperation, but that nobody was going to ride out for a widow in a land dispute." The room was very quiet. "But he came," Rudd said. "He wasn't speaking to her anymore. He was speaking to something he was working out for himself, turning it over like a man who has just understood that the hand he was dealt was not the hand he was told he was holding. He came," Clara confirmed, "because Thomas was his brother, and I asked him to, and because Elias Thorne has more integrity in one hand than Silas Vance has in his entire organization." She crouched back down to Rudd's eye level one more time. "That's the difference, Rudd, between men who build things and men who take them. The people on the building side show up for each other. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Rudd held her gaze. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I reckon I do." Pete came back through the door with the boot in one hand and a lantern in the other. He held the boot out to Clara. She took it, pressed the heel, felt the small click of the hollow space releasing, and drew out the folded document, Thomas's handwriting, precise and careful, and present in her hands. She held it for a moment. "What do you need?" Pete said. "Help me get the horses ready," she said. "All 4, Marsh's too." She handed the document to Elias. "Keep this inside your coat. Don't let it leave your body until we're standing in front of a federal judge." Elias took it. He held it for a moment, the way she had the weight of it, the significance. Then he tucked it inside his coat and buttoned it over. "I want you to know something," he said. "You can tell me while we ride." "No, I want to say it now." He met her eyes. "Thomas used to write to me. Not often, but sometimes late when he was thinking about things, and he wrote about you more than anything else." Elias's voice was careful, controlled. "He said you were the reason he built things worth building. He said you were the reason he bothered." Clara looked at him. The grief was there again, patient waiting, knowing its moment was not far now. She felt it pressing against the inside of her chest, like something that has been held back long enough and is simply waiting to be let go at the right time, in the right place, with the right people around her. "After Fredericksburg," she said. Her voice was steady. Elias nodded. "After Fredericksburg," he agreed. They were on the road 90 minutes before dawn. Clara, Elias, Marsh. Pete on his old roan that he had insisted on bringing because, as he put it, he had not worked on this ranch for 11 years to miss the ending. Rudd rode with his hands bound in front of him and said nothing, and Clara rode at the front and watched the road and thought about Thomas. She thought about the way he'd laughed at breakfast when Pete told a bad joke. She thought about the way he'd looked at the land, sometimes not like a man surveying property, but like a man expressing gratitude. She thought about the Bible, with its hollow back cover and the document tucked inside it, and how Thomas had planned for this moment years before it arrived, and had trusted her to be the one standing in it. He'd been right. She had always known he was right. An hour into the ride, Elias pulled up beside her. "Road splits ahead," he said quietly. "Main road goes east toward Fredericksburg direct. Old Cattle Trail cuts north, comes out 10 miles past the county line." "Vance's men will be watching the main road," Clara said. "Yes. The Cattle Trail is longer. 2 hours longer, maybe 3. But not watched. Probably not. It's not the obvious route." Clara considered for exactly 3 seconds. "Cattle Trail," she said. They turned north off the main road without slowing, and the dark swallowed them, and behind them, the lights of the ranch. Pete had left the lanterns burning. The warm domestic illusion of a house full of people going nowhere glowed small and steady against the Texas black. Vance would watch those lights and wait. He would wait for movement that wasn't coming. And by the time he understood what was happening, by the time he sent Rudd to report, and realized Rudd wasn't there to report, by the time the information filtered back through his network of paid eyes and compromised telegraphers, they would already be in Fredericksburg. Clara rode and didn't look back, and let Thomas be there with her in the dark, the way he always was, in the set of her spine, and the steadiness of her hands, and the absolute bone-deep certainty that the land behind her was worth every single thing it had cost. She was not finished. She was, in fact, just beginning. And somewhere ahead, in a federal courthouse that answered to no county commissioner and no sheriff in Silas Vance's pocket, a judge was going to hear the truth. Clara Elmore intended to make sure of it. They reached Fredericksburg at 9:30 in the morning. The cattle trail had added nearly 3 hours to the ride, and every one of those hours had been spent in the particular silence of people who are too tired and too tense to speak unnecessarily. Marsh had said almost nothing since they left. Rudd had said less. Pete had hummed occasionally old hymns, low and tuneless, and Clara had understood that this was Pete's version of prayer and had not interrupted it. Elias rode with one hand always near his coat over the place where Thomas's document rested against his chest. Clara noticed this every time she looked at him, and she did not say anything about it because there was nothing to say. Some gestures are just what they are. The federal courthouse in Fredericksburg was a 2-story stone building on the main street, substantial and permanent-looking in the way that federal buildings are designed to look, as if to communicate that certain things are not subject to negotiation. Clara had been here once before years ago with Thomas to file an original land registration. She remembered Thomas standing at the clerk's window with his hat in his hand and his documentation in perfect order, patient and methodical, doing everything correctly. Doing everything the way you were supposed to do it, because he believed that the system, if you respected it, would respect you back. She was here to find out if he'd been right. She dismounted without waiting for anyone and was through the front door before Elias had finished securing his horse. The clerk at the front desk was a compact man in his 50s named Aldous Webb, according to the placard on his desk, and he had the expression of someone who has spent a career watching people arrive with urgent problems and has developed a professional equanimity about it. "I need to speak with a federal judge," Clara said. "Today. This morning." Webb looked at her, at the dust on her clothes, at the set of her jaw. "Do you have an appointment, ma'am?" I have documented evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud across multiple land claims in 4 counties, a witness to premeditated murder, a former Pinkerton agent with 3 years of investigative records, and a man who broke into my home last night on the orders of the individual responsible for my husband's death. She put both hands flat on the desk. I don't have an appointment, but I have all of that. Webb was quiet for a moment. I'll see if Judge Morrow is available, he said. He was available. Judge Henry Morrow was a tall man with white hair and the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have spent decades listening to other people's worst moments and rendering judgment on them. He came into the anteroom where Clara and Elias were waiting. Marsh and Rudd seated against the wall under Pete's quiet, armed supervision, and he looked at all of them in turn with the unhurried assessment of a man who reads rooms for a living. Mrs. Elmore, he said. Mr. Thorne, said Elias. Elias Thorne, Thomas Elmore's brother. I see. Judge Morrow looked at Rudd. And this gentleman? His name is Rudd, Clara said. He works for Silas Vance. He broke into my home last night attempting to steal a federal land survey document. She paused. He's prepared to cooperate. Rudd, to his credit, did not contradict this. He simply looked at the floor with the expression of a man who has run out of better options and is making peace with the ones remaining. Judge Morrow studied Rudd for a moment. Then he looked back at Clara. Come into my office, he said. All of you. The next hour was the most important hour of Clara's life, and also in some ways, the strangest. She had imagined this moment in fragments in the exhausted near sleep of recent nights, but she had imagined it as confrontational, heated a battle. What it actually was procedural and precise, and somehow that was harder. It required a different kind of endurance, not the hot adrenaline-fueled endurance of immediate danger, but the slow, careful endurance of laying out the truth methodically, piece by piece, in front of a man whose approval she needed and whose judgment she could not control. Elias presented the documents first. Thomas's federal survey, the 1847 land grant, the tax assessment discrepancy, his own leather journal, 3 years of accumulated evidence organized with the thoroughness of a man who had spent those years knowing that one day he would have to stand in exactly this room and make it all make sense to someone who hadn't lived it, Judge Morrow read. He asked precise, specific questions. Elias answered them precisely and specifically, and Clara watched the judge's face and tried to read it the way she would read weather, looking for the indicators of what was coming. Then Marsh spoke. Doyle Marsh sat in the chair across from Judge Morrow's desk and told the story of the North Ridge, and his voice was steady in the way that voices are steady when a person has decided that the truth, however costly, is the only thing left worth offering. He told it plain and complete without embellishment, and without the self-protective omissions that would have softened his own role in it. He had been there. He had been sent there by Vance. He had watched 2 men he didn't know come up behind Thomas Elmore, and he had watched what happened next, and he had said nothing for 11 days, because he was afraid. He was still afraid. But he said it anyway. When Marsh finished, the room was very quiet. Judge Morrow set down the pen he'd been holding and looked at the surface of his desk for a moment. Clara had the impression of a man adding up a column of numbers he already knew the sum of confirming it against his own judgment. Mrs. Elmore, he said. Yes, sir. The survey document, the original, is currently in Mr. Thorne's possession. Elias reached into his coat and placed it on the desk. The judge looked at it without touching it for a moment, then picked it up carefully and examined it. His expression did not change, but something in the quality of his attention did a deepening, a settling. This is properly executed and registered, he said. The federal filing stamp is dated 18 months ago. This document has been on record with the Austin Land Office for, he checked the notation, 14 months. Yes, sir, Clara said. Thomas filed it and informed no one outside this office because he understood that local channels in Kerr County were compromised. Judge Morrow looked at her. He understood correctly. He set the document down. Deputy Harlan Croft filed a report with the County Commissioner's Office 6 weeks ago claiming the Elmore land survey was improperly executed and recommending that the federal filing be reviewed for fraud. Clara went very still. "I didn't know that," she said. "Most people outside the county commissioner's circle wouldn't," the judge said. "The recommendation was forwarded to the Regional Federal Land Office where it has been held." He said the word with a precise, colorless quality that communicated exactly what he thought of how it had been held and by whom. If this court had not been made aware of it through an alternative channel, the review process would have created sufficient legal ambiguity to delay any action on the original filing by, he considered, 18 months, perhaps more, Elias said quietly. Long enough for Vance to complete the acquisition through other means. That would appear to have been the intent, Judge Morrow said. Clara looked at the judge. She felt the pieces of it arranging themselves in her mind. Not just the attack on the ridge, not just the harassment, not just the midnight break-in, but the whole architecture of it. The systematic, patient, multi-layered construction of a situation where she would have no legal ground to stand on, even if she stood there bravely. Where Thomas's careful work would have been rendered meaningless by paperwork and process, and the small, quiet corruption of men in offices who were paid to look the other way at the right moments. Thomas had known. He had understood the whole shape of it, which was why he had filed federally instead of locally, why he had kept the original hidden, why he had never told Clara the full extent of it, because he'd hoped to resolve it before it reached her. And it had still killed him. "Judge Morrow," Clara said. Her voice was steady, remarkably steady even to her own ears. "What happens now?" The judge folded his hands on the desk. "What happens now," he said, "is that this court issues an emergency injunction prohibiting any transfer sale or legal action regarding the Elmore parcel pending full federal review. What happens now is that I issue a summons for Silas Vance to appear before this court within 72 hours. What happens now is that I forward Mr. Marsh's testimony along with the evidence presented by Mr. Thorne to the Federal Marshal's Office with a recommendation for immediate investigation into the circumstances of Thomas Elmore's death." He paused. "And what happens now is that I notify the Regional Land Office that the complaint filed by Deputy Croft regarding the Elmore survey is under federal scrutiny, which will effectively suspend that review process until this court determines its legitimacy." Clara breathed. It was a longer breath than the ones she'd been taking for 11 days. "One more thing," Judge Morrow said. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't expected, not official, not procedural, personal. The expression of a man speaking as himself rather than as a function. "Your husband's survey work is meticulous. Exceptional, frankly. I've seen a great deal of land documentation in this court, and this is among the most carefully executed I've encountered." He held her gaze. He built his case knowing it might outlast him. That takes a particular kind of man. Clara held the judge's gaze and did not let her face change. "Yes," she said. "It does." They were outside on the courthouse steps when it happened. Rudd had been handed over to the federal marshal's deputy, a quiet transaction paperwork and acknowledgement, and Marsh was sitting on the steps with his hat between his knees and the expression of a man who has just set down something heavy and is learning what his hands feel like without the weight. Pete was talking to the marshal's horse for reasons that were entirely Pete and required no explanation. Elias was beside Clara, and they were both standing in the late morning light that had turned the street gold, and for the first time in 11 days, Clara felt something that was not grief and not fury and not the cold tactical clarity of survival. She felt tired, the real kind of tired, the kind that means the immediate crisis has passed and the body is finally allowing itself to acknowledge what it's been through. She didn't sit down, not yet, but she let herself feel it. "He's going to fight it," Elias said. "Not a prediction, a certainty. Vance, he'll retain the best attorney he can find, and he'll challenge the federal jurisdiction, and he'll—" "I know," Clara said. "It may take time. I know that too." She looked at the street in front of them. "But the injunction holds the land, That's what matters today. Today, the land is protected." She paused. "Everything else is subsequent." Elias was quiet for a moment. Then, "Clara." Something in his voice made her look at him. He was holding Thomas's survey document. The judge had returned it to them after making certified copies for the court record, and he was looking at it with an expression she recognized from the kitchen table 2 nights ago. The expression of a man carrying something he's been carrying too long. "I need to tell you something I should have told you when I arrived." "All right. The Pinkerton investigation. The one that was shut down 3 years ago." He paused. "It wasn't just a client complaint. There was another agent working the case with me. Good man. His name was Foster." He stopped. Clara waited. "Vance's people found out about him 6 months into the investigation." Elias's jaw tightened. He had an accident. Same kind of accident as Thomas, a fall, wrong terrain, wrong time of day. Wrong missing boot. He looked at her. "I resigned because the agency decided the case was too dangerous to the organization's relationship with certain political interests in this state, and I couldn't—" He stopped again. "I couldn't let it go. I couldn't let Foster be another name that nobody said out loud." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "How long have you been carrying this?" she said. 3 years. "And Thomas?" "Thomas knew some of it, not all." Elias's voice was very quiet. "I thought I was protecting him by not telling him the full scope, by building the case completely before I came." He looked at the document in his hands. "I was wrong. I know that. I will know that for the rest of my life." The grief was pressing harder now. Clara could feel it, large, patient, fully assembled, waiting. She reached out and put her hand on Elias's arm. Not a long gesture, not dramatic, just present. "Foster's name is going to be said out loud," she said. "In that courtroom, in that record. You made sure of it." She held his eyes. "And Thomas's name is going to be said out loud. You made sure of that too." Elias looked at her. Something in his face held tight for 3 years longer. Maybe moved. "You're a great deal more than Thomas described," he said. "And he described you very well." "He was accurate," Clara said. "He always was." From down the steps, Pete's voice rose with a mild complaint about the marshal's horse blocking his access to the water trough, and Marsh made a sound that might, for the first time, have been the beginning of something that would eventually become a laugh, and the moment opened up into the ordinary, specific texture of the real world, continuing on around them. But before it did, before Clara turned back to the business of the day, the paperwork and the testimony signatures and the long ride home that still lay ahead, she allowed herself one full moment. She thought about Thomas, not the survey, not the ridge, not the hollow boot heel and the hidden document, and the terrible, careful way he had prepared for a future he hoped wouldn't come. She thought about him the way she needed to think about him, as himself. The breakfast laugh, the hand on her shoulder on a hard day, the way he'd looked at the land, grateful and certain, like a man who knew exactly what he had. He'd been right to build it. He'd been right to trust her with it, and she had not let him down. The morning continued. The courthouse steps filled with ordinary people conducting ordinary business. Elias guided Marsh back inside for a second round of testimony documentation. Pete finally resolved the situation with the marshal's horse through methods that were purely Pete. Clara stood in the summer light with her hands at her sides and her spine straight, and she let herself be exactly where she was. The land was protected. Justice was in motion. And Thomas Elmore's work, all of it, every careful, methodical, honest piece of it, was on the record now exactly where it belonged. The ride home was quieter than the ride out. Not the tense, watchful quiet of people moving through danger, but the different kind, the quiet that settles after something large has been decided and the body hasn't yet caught up with the fact that it's allowed to rest. Clara rode at the front and didn't push the pace. There was no reason to push it now. The injunction was filed. The summons had been issued. The federal marshal's office had Thomas's case in hand. For the first time in 12 days, the urgency that had been running like a current through everything she did was gone, and what remained in its absence was something she hadn't expected. Not peace, not yet, but the possibility of it, the shape of it somewhere ahead. Pete rode beside her for a while without talking, which was one of the things she had always valued most about Pete, his understanding of when talking was what a person needed, and when silence was the better gift. He had worked for Thomas since before Clara arrived on this land, and he had loved Thomas the way old men love good young men they've watched build something worth building. That love had transferred, not diminished, after Thomas died. Clara felt it in the way he positioned himself, always slightly between her and whatever the road might bring, even now when the road was safe. "You did good," Pete said finally, when they were an hour out of Fredericksburg. "We did good," Clara said. Pete was quiet for a moment. "Thomas would have said the same thing," he said. "Exact same words." Clara kept her eyes on the road. "I know," she said. Elias came up on her other side. He had been riding at the back, keeping an eye on the road behind them. Old habit, probably the trained instinct of a man who has spent years knowing that the most dangerous moment is often the one right after you think you're safe. "Marshall's deputy is following Vance's movements," he said. "I spoke to him before we left. Vance was seen in Kerrville this morning. He doesn't know yet what happened in Fredericksburg." "He'll know by tonight," Clara said. "Yes. Which means he'll contact his attorney, and his attorney will begin looking for procedural angles to challenge the federal jurisdiction claim." Elias paused. "He'll find some. He always does. It may delay the full resolution by months. But the injunction holds." "The injunction holds," Elias confirmed. "The land is protected while the case proceeds. He cannot sell it, transfer it, or claim it through any legal mechanism, while the federal court has it under review." Clara nodded. She had already processed it on the courthouse steps while Pete was negotiating with the marshal's horse, and had arrived at the same place she always arrived when she confronted the gap between what she wanted and what was immediately possible. Thomas had taught her that, or maybe she had always known it, and Thomas had simply confirmed it. You do not get to choose the timeline of justice. You only get to choose whether you pursue it. She was pursuing it, whatever it took. They reached the ranch in the late afternoon, and the first thing Clara saw when they came around the cedar break at the property line was that someone had been there. She pulled up short. The front gate was open. Not broken open, deliberately swung wide in the specific way that says someone went through it and didn't bother to close it behind them. The kind of message that isn't a message so much as a signature. "We were here. We can come back." Elias was already off his horse. "Stay," he said to Clara, not as an order, but as a request, which was why she stayed. She watched him move to the gate, check the ground, move toward the house. Pete came up beside her with his hand on his revolver, and Marsh held still behind them both. The wait was 3 minutes. It felt considerably longer. Elias came back to the gate. "They came through," he said. "4 of them from the tracks. Searched the house. Everything's been gone through. Drawers, shelves, the desk." He looked at Clara. "They were looking for the document." "The document is in the federal court record in Fredericksburg," Clara said. "I know that." Elias held her eyes. "They don't. Not yet." He paused. "They didn't damage anything. No destruction. Just search." Clara sat very still on her horse for a moment. Then she dismounted, walked through her own gate, and went inside. The desk was the worst of it. Thomas's desk, every drawer pulled out the contents. Scattered papers she had organized with such care spread across the floor without regard. The Bible was on the floor too. Open spine cracked, the back cover peeled where someone had found the hollow and understood what it meant. Clara picked up the Bible. She stood in the middle of Thomas's study with his Bible in her hands and looked at the scattered papers around her and felt something move through her that was not grief and not fury, but both of them together fused into something harder and quieter than either one alone. They had come into this house. Again. Into the room where Thomas had worked and planned and written his careful letters. Into the space he had built with his own intentions, his own intelligence, his own belief that honest work and documented truth would protect what he loved. They had come in here and gone through his things looking for something to destroy. And they hadn't found it. Because it was already beyond their reach. Elias was in the doorway. "Clara," he said carefully. "I'm all right," she said. She set the Bible on the desk. She began picking up papers. "Help me." He came in and helped her. They didn't speak while they worked, just gathered and sorted and restored. Each paper returned to its place with the deliberate attention of people who understand that order is not merely practical, but also a kind of statement. This is still ours. You did not take it. You came here and went through our things, and you found nothing, and you left. And when you left, we came back and put everything back exactly where it belongs. Pete started on the kitchen. Marsh, without being asked, worked on the parlor. By the time the sun was fully down, the house looked like itself again. Clara made coffee and set it on the table, and they all sat down together. Clara, Elias, Pete, and Marsh. And nobody said anything particularly significant for a while. Because sometimes the most important thing is just to sit in a place you've fought for and let it be yours. Then Marsh said, "I want to say something." Everyone looked at him. He was holding his coffee cup in both hands and looking at the table with the expression of a man assembling words he's been working on for a while. "I know I'm not someone who has earned a place at this table," he said. "I know what I did and what I didn't do, and I know the weight of both of those things." He looked up at Clara. "But I want to say that what you've done, what you've both done, I've been around men my whole life who would have sold that land in the first week, would have taken Vance's money and told themselves it was practical." His voice was rough. "You didn't do that. And I think Thomas knew you wouldn't. I think he knew that exactly." Clara looked at him. "He knew," she said simply. Marsh nodded. He looked back at his coffee. "I'll testify at every subsequent hearing," he said. "Whatever's needed, however long it takes. I want that on record too. Not just what I said today, but that I'm saying it again here in front of all of you." He paused. "I should have said it 11 days ago." "Yes," Clara said. Not unkindly, just truthfully. "You should have." Marsh accepted that. He didn't flinch from it. "But you're here now," Clara added. "And you said it. That matters." The night settled around the house, and for the first time since Thomas died, it settled without menace, without the quality of threat pressing in from outside. Clara sat at the table long after Pete and Marsh had gone to sleep, and Elias sat across from her, and they talked the way people talk when the immediate crisis is over and the deeper things finally have room to surface. He told her about the 3 years. The investigation, the evidence, the dead ends, the moments when he'd nearly given up, and the thing that kept him going, which was Foster's face and Thomas's letters, and the knowledge that the work Thomas was doing on this land was building toward the same truth Elias was building toward from a different direction. Clara told him about the 11 days, the shovel in the hard ground and the 2 men watching from the ridge, the fence and the water line, and the nights with the rifle across her knees. The moment she'd read Marsh's note and understood that the truth was there waiting, if she could just get herself and the right people in front of the right judge before Vance dismantled the path to it. "Were you afraid?" Elias asked. She thought about it honestly. "Yes," she said. "Every day. Not of Vance specifically. Of failing Thomas. Of having everything he built come apart because I wasn't enough to hold it." She looked at her hands on the table. "He trusted me with all of it. That's a weight." "You held it," Elias said. "We held it," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "What happens next?" he said. "The case will go on. Vance will fight. There'll be hearings, probably depositions, probably." "I know," Clara said. "I'll be at every one of them." She paused. "Will you stay?" Elias looked at her. Something in his face shifted the carefully managed distance of a man who has been alone with his purpose for 3 years, warming, slightly recalibrating. "I don't have anywhere else I need to be," he said. "That's not the same as wanting to stay." He considered that. He took it seriously the way Clara had learned Elias took everything with full attention and honest assessment. "No," he said. "It's not the same thing." He looked at the room around them, the desk, the straightened papers, the Bible on its shelf. But the answer is yes either way. I want to see this through. I owe Thomas that." He paused. "And I think I owe myself that too." Clara nodded. Then 3 weeks later, the first of the subsequent hearings happened, and it brought a development that none of them had anticipated. The federal marshal's investigation into Thomas's death had moved faster than anyone expected, faster than Vance's legal team was prepared for. And in the process of interviewing witnesses in Kerrville, the deputy marshal had found someone who hadn't come forward before. A woman named Ruth Calloway, who ran the boarding house on the east side of town and who had overheard a conversation in her dining room 10 days before Thomas died. Two men she didn't know speaking quietly over their supper, discussing a job and a date and a ridge. Ruth Calloway had not known what it meant at the time. She knew what it meant now. She presented her statement to the deputy marshal with the composure of a woman who has been waiting for someone to ask her the right question and is enormously relieved that someone finally has. Clara heard about this from Elias, who heard it from the deputy marshal directly. And when she heard it, she sat down on the porch steps and put her face in her hands and stayed there for a long moment. Not because she was devastated, because she was not. Because what she felt was the specific, almost unbearable relief of having the last piece fall into place. The piece she hadn't known she needed proof that was not circumstantial, not inferential, not dependent on documents and surveys and tax discrepancies, but direct. Human. Two men. A date. A ridge. Thomas had not fallen, and now there was a woman in a boarding house dining room who could say so under oath. When Clara looked up, Elias was watching her from the doorway. "It's enough," she said. "Isn't it?" "It's more than enough," he said. She nodded. She looked out at the land. Her land. Thomas's land. The land that had cost everything, and was worth every bit of what it cost. And she let herself feel what she had been waiting to feel since the morning she found him in the creek bed. Not fury. Not cold tactical purpose. Not the compressed, controlled energy of a woman who cannot afford to break. Grief. Clean and full, and completely her own. She let it come. She didn't stop it, or manage it, or redirect it into something useful. She just let it move through her the way storms move through open country, taking what it needed to take, leaving what it left. Pete came and sat beside her on the step, and didn't say anything. He put his old hand over hers on the step, and held it. And that was enough, and more than enough. When she was done, she wiped her face with the back of her hand, and looked at the land again. The fence line on the northwest was repaired. The East Fork water channel was clear. The cattle were in the lower pasture slow, and settled in the summer afternoon. Everything Thomas had built was standing, because she had stood beside it. "Pete," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "I'm going to need help resurveying the east boundary. Now that the federal court has validated Thomas's original survey, I want a current record filed alongside it. Proper documentation. Everything done right." Pete looked at her. A slow smile started somewhere in his weathered face. "I reckon we can do that," he said. Elias came down the steps and stood in front of them both. "I know a surveyor in San Antonio," he said. "Good man, honest. He worked with Foster before." He stopped, recalibrated. "He does good work. I'll write to him." "Do that," Clara said. She stood up. She straightened her spine the way she had straightened it at the courthouse steps at the gate at the study desk with Thomas's Bible in her hands. The way she had been straightening it for 12 days, and would straighten it for as many more as the case required. Not because she was performing strength for anyone, but because it was hers. Because Thomas had seen it before she'd fully claimed it, and he had been right about it, and she was not going to let him have been right about it for nothing. Silas Vance would have his day in federal court. Deputy Croft would answer for his report. Gerald at the telegraph office would answer for his years of quiet betrayal. The two men from the Ridge, whose names the deputy marshal was already closing in on, would answer for what they had done to Thomas Elmore on a July morning on a hill he had known since the first day he set foot on this land. All of it was coming. All of it was in motion, turning with the slow, irreversible weight of documented truth in federal hands. Clara had started it. She had carried it through every moment when it could have been stopped. And she would be standing in that courtroom when it finished. But today, this afternoon, with the summer light falling gold across land that was legally, permanently, undeniably hers today, was for Thomas. She reached into her pocket and took out the folded letter she had written that morning before Elias brought the news about Ruth Calloway, when she had sat at Thomas's desk in the early quiet and written the only letter she had not been able to write until now. She carried it out to the North Ridge, his ridge, the place where he had worked and measured and understood things about this land that nobody else had bothered to understand. And she sat down on the rock where she had found his surveying rod. And she read the letter aloud to no one and to him. And she said everything she had not been able to say at the grave because the men on the ridge were watching, and she had promised she wouldn't cry. She cried now. She let herself have every bit of it. And when she was done, she folded the letter and set it beneath the rock under the Texas summer on the land he had loved and surveyed and documented and ultimately given everything to protect. Then she stood up, looked out at what he had built, and said the only thing that remained to be said. "It's ours, Thomas," she said. "It's still ours, and it's going to stay that way." She walked back down the ridge. The land held her steps solid and certain, exactly as it always had, exactly as it always would.